What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 3 deadline. So I'm going to go through some of the transfer news, press conference information, and answer some of your questions. But before all that, I want to talk about Sleeper, which is a completely free fantasy football app, which you can download by clicking the link in the description below or scanning the QR code on screen. One of the free fantasy football games they have is Premier League Draft Fantasy, and it's never too late to give it a try because the draft can be started at any time and runs through to the end of the season. And the international break is the perfect time to try it out because there's a break in the Premier League and all transfers will have been completed. It's all on the Sleeper app as well, so all you need is some friends to draft with, and you can even do it from the comfort of your own sofa. It's fully customizable as well. You can change the type of draft, how many managers are involved, the amount of players that you have to pick. You can even change the scoring system, so if you want goals to be worth more or less, you can change that. You can also make things like tackles, saves and successful dribbles worth more points than they would be in FPL. There's really no reason not to give it a go. Sleeper is completely free, and as well as Draft Fantasy, they also have their Pick'em game where you can set up leagues with your friends to predict the results every single weekend to see who's got the best football knowledge. There's also news and live scores that all feed into the games as well. So make sure to check it out. Links in the description below or click that QR code on screen. Alright, let's talk about Ivan Toney. There's multiple reports going around at the moment that Brentford have agreed a deal to allow him to leave to Saudi Arabia, which has knock-on effects for FPL. Now, I should say at the time recording, this deal is not official, but it does look likely that he's going to leave before the transfer window shuts later today. Just to get this video out on time, I've got to talk about some of this stuff before it's completely official. So if we find out that Toney is staying, you can just completely ignore all of this. But I think the two main players that benefit from him leaving, especially with Thiago, obviously, their new signing that's picked up an injury, is Mbeumo and Wissa, right? Mbeumo is 7 million. He would almost certainly get penalty taking duties because he's really good at them, right? Toney's brilliant, but Mbeumo's also got a really good technique. He very rarely misses, and he almost always plays 90 minutes. You've seen that in the first two games, 89 minutes against Palace, 90 against Liverpool, and they've got Southampton at home this week. Now, because it's Man City away in 4 and Spurs away in 5, there is maybe not a massive rush to bring him in with your free transfer, but if you could bring him in and then bench him for Man City away because the rest of your squad was looking good, I think it's a pretty good transfer in. And long term, it's great because from Game Week 6 onwards, it's West Ham at home, Wolves at home, Man United away, Ipswich at home, Fulham away, Bournemouth at home. I'm telling you now, on Game Week 6 wildcard, everyone will have Mbeumo if he's fit and available and on penalties. So he looks like a great option. You don't necessarily have to bring him in this week, but you could definitely consider it with Southampton at home. If I was on wildcard in Game Week 3, I'm pretty certain he would be in my squad. And then the other player is Wissa, who's only 6.1 million. Goal and assist in the first game. A blank against Liverpool, but that can happen. His minutes aren't as secure, and Brentford do have other options that can play, but I would bet on him starting more often than not. And at 6.1, he's maybe not a bad option. Like, there's quite a few players we can consider around that price for FPL, but I don't know how many of them are absolutely certain to start and get you points every week. Like, João Pedro looks great for 5.5. Long term, Brighton have a lot of options. Adam Armstrong, probably absolutely nailed on, but how many goals will Southampton score? You got Muniz at Fulham, but the good fixtures they've got are not running out, but you've obviously missed Leicester at home. If you don't bring him in this week, you've missed Ipswich away as well. And Nketiah is probably moving to Crystal Palace. Again, not officially done at the time of recording, but will he definitely start ahead of Mateta? Will the two play? There's lots of question marks. So I actually quite like Wissa, but I think because of the non-guaranteed minutes like Mbeumo and no penalties, I wouldn't be in as much of a rush to get him, but he definitely benefits if Toney leaves. So I'll leave it at that because it's not official yet, but I think we all probably realise at this point Ivan Toney is almost certainly going one way or another, and if that happens, Mbeumo and Wissa suddenly look a lot better. Alright, let's talk about Spurs next. We've heard from Ange Postecoglou, and it does look like Dominic Solanke is going to miss Game Week 3. He said he's close, but I think we'll err on the side of caution with the international break. So basically, they're not going to take a risk with him. And the fact that you come back after the break in Game Week 4 to Arsenal at home makes me feel like he's probably a good sell for a lot of people. Now, the usual caveats apply. If your squad is looking great and you've got an 8th attacker that you can just play instead, you can bench Solanke for another week and then decide what to do in Game Week 4. Happy days, you should go ahead and do that. But for most people, you're missing another game week and then it's a difficult fixture. I still think he's going to represent good value long term, but right now I just don't really see a need to hold on to him. And also, after the international break, if there's still a bit of an issue there, they may not risk him again against Arsenal because they've got so many players that can play in that number 9 position. So it looks quite likely that Son is going to play through the middle, and then Johnson and Odegaard maybe again, possibly on the wings. We'll have to wait and see what happens. The issue is, who do you buy? Like, there's a ton of options in the forward line, but I'm not sure how many stand out if you don't have money to upgrade him. So Solanke hasn't dropped in price yet, so he's still 7.5. If you've got the money to go up to Wattkins, he looks great. Isak would definitely be an upgrade as well. And I like Havertz as a long-term option, but they do play Man City away in Game Week 5, which isn't ideal. So that's if you've got more money to spend. If you need to go 7.5 or below, it's a bit trickier. We've just talked about Brentford, so Wissa may be an option. Southampton at home, possibly you can bench him for Man City away and then just play him after that if Toney leaves. Not a bad pick, I would say. Nicholas Jackson's gone up to 7.6. Chelsea might sign another number 9 by the time the transfer window shuts, so let's wait and see on that. João Pedro could be good long term, but it's Arsenal away this week, so it doesn't really make too much sense to bring him in. Chris Wood, again, I think he'll start against Wolves at home. Long term, his minutes might be up for a bit of... up for debate is what I'm trying to say about whether he'll keep his place. And in the last game, he came off 74. It was 71 in Game Week 1. Like, Awani is always waiting. So I'm not sure I would go there. Xerxes, given that Mason Mount is injured, may well start. But is it a great time to bring in a Man United attacker with Liverpool at home? Possibly not. I'm not convinced he's going to be this great goal scorer either. I think he might improve the team overall. But for FPL, I'm not completely convinced. I'd need to see more. And then the options just get kind of, not worse and worse, but there's no standout, I don't think, for 7.5 or below. Like Muniz maybe. Ipswich away, West Ham at home, Newcastle at home, not a bad option. Then the fixtures get a little bit tougher after that. Mateta, decent enough. Chelsea away, Leicester at home, Man United at home. Even with Nketiah there, I expect him to start. He's just been in such good form the last year. It's really difficult to see him coming out of the team. And then maybe Evan Nielsen. I've got a feeling this guy could do really well. But again, it's Everton away, Chelsea at home, Liverpool away. If you bring him in and get a blank against Everton, it's not going to feel great seeing Chelsea and Liverpool. I feel like he's probably one to wait for Game Week 6 onwards. So if I was buying a striker or a forward for Solanke's price or less this week, I think I'd go cheaper and I'd probably go Muniz or maybe Wissa. I mean, Jamie Vardy, to be fair, has started the first 2 games, and Leicester's fixtures are actually pretty good coming up. Villa at home, Palace away, Everton at home, Arsenal away, Bournemouth at home, Southampton away, Forest at home, Ipswich away. I've still got reservations about whether or not he can play all those matches, even getting subbed early, but maybe he could be a punt. I think I would downgrade. I would go to Muniz or Wissa and then look to spend the money elsewhere either this week or next. If I was going to spend the 7.5 in total, I'd probably go to Mateta. So there's some good news for Crystal Palace fans and maybe FPL managers alike. Oliver Glasner in his press conference said that Mark Guéhi will be a Crystal Palace player at the end of the window and that he's not going. He said he never had any doubt and that Guéhi was not pushing to leave Crystal Palace. So that's a good thing, especially considering they lost Anderson. It would have been a bit of a blow to lose both of them. Now, I'm not saying that Crystal Palace will now become great defensively. They haven't looked particularly decent so far. But it makes me panic a little bit less about owning the likes of Henderson. Chelsea away is not a great fixture in Game Week 3, but Leicester at home in Game Week 4 is pretty decent. So if you've got the likes of Guéhi or Munoz or Henderson, there's probably not a need to panic on them. I'm not expecting any points this week, but Game Week 4 looks fine. It's probably just something you can fix on Wildcard rather than rushing out and doing it now. And also, interestingly, that means that Newcastle won't be signing him. And I haven't really seen them linked to any other centre-back. So perhaps they're just not going to make a signing. They're obviously missing Share through suspension. Botman's injured at the moment. So there is a few worries there. And also, I know we're talking about Crystal Palace here mainly, but Trippier still hasn't gone at the time of recording. And that means that eventually Livramento is probably at threat for minutes as well. I think Newcastle defence is probably just an avoid for me completely at the moment until we see how they settle in terms of the back four. Because if Trippier comes in, he's got competition from Livramento. Share's out at the moment. Dan Burn can play left centre-back. You've got Lewis Hall at left-back, but we know Kelly can play there as well. And then not signing Guéhi, who would have improved that defence. I just think with the fixtures Newcastle have got coming up, I would avoid them. I wouldn't buy Crystal Palace defenders necessarily, but maybe you don't need to panic about them either. So we've heard from Pep Guardiola as well. He said Rodri is much better, Kovacic as well. So it's probably not going to be too long until we see Rodri back in the 11. Possibly not this week, but from game week 4 onwards. He also said that Phil Foden still doesn't feel good. The rest are okay. So it seems pretty likely that Foden's going to miss game week 3 entirely, just like he did in game week 2. So if you've held on this long, just get rid of him. I know there's going to be that thought of, okay, he might miss game week 3, that's fair, but from game week 4 he'll be fine. But it's not a guarantee he goes straight back into that first 11 if they're still performing well. It's just too much money to hold on to. So Foden's got to be sold. Guardiola was also asked about Walker and Rico Lewis, and obviously that's interesting at the moment because a lot of people are buying Rico Lewis. On Kyle Walker's England squad absence, he said when he will be back to his best, and he will be soon, always he's an incredible weapon for the national team to be used because he has specific qualities that is really, really needed by Man City, right? So obviously he's talking Kyle Walker up there. It's worth pointing out, Pep Guardiola, like most managers, talks all of his players up, right? So it doesn't mean Kyle Walker is getting straight back into the team, this week. On Rico Lewis, he said, Rico gives to the Man City team, what Rico Lewis gives to the Man City team, Kyle Walker cannot give us. And what Kyle gives to us, Rico cannot do it. That's what it's all about. Not a big, long squad, but everyone pushes each other. Now, if I had to simplify that, I would say, going forward, Rico Lewis much better. Defending, Kyle Walker much better, right? That's probably too simplified for how Pep sees it. But I think that's kind of roughly what it's all about. So I think for now, given how well Rico Lewis is playing, he will probably stay in the squad. In the 11 for West Ham away. And you might even get a start in game week 4 against Brentford at home as well. But I think when it comes down to it, if Pep feels like he needs someone more defensively sound, Kyle Walker will be back in that team. It's not that you shouldn't buy Rico Lewis because ultimately he's a really good price. I'm just going to double check. I think he's gone up to 4.6. Yeah, that's still excellent value, right? Plenty of clean sheets and attacking potential there. You just shouldn't buy him thinking that he's now got that place and it's his to lose. Rico Lewis could play amazing for the next couple of games, and Kyle Walker will still probably come in for Arsenal at home because of the difficulty of the fixture. And you might look at that and think, well, who cares, right? Do you really want to play a defender against Arsenal? Not necessarily. But then Kyle Walker might also play against Newcastle away in game week 6. And if he starts playing really well, he could then keep his place in the side. So Rico Lewis for me is a short-term punt. I think you hope that you get West Ham away and Brentford at home. And then after that, who knows what happens. And maybe you wildcard him out. So I wouldn't try and put people off going for him. I would just set your expectations where they should be. And that is that at any point he could come back out of the side. All right, let's get into some of your questions. So how do we deal with all the price drops and rises that are happening at a rampaging pace? And there has been a ton of price drops in particular so far. I think ultimately you just have to use it as another source of information. If you've got a player that you're really happy with, that has good fixtures coming up, potential for points, and you don't want to sell them, and they're dropping in price, you just have to ignore it. You are not going to be able to go through the whole season and take out a player every single time they're about to drop in price. You won't have enough transfers, and you'll end up selling players that are actually pretty good to hold. And also, if you're confident that the points are coming, they might drop in price, but they can go back up as well. So take Eze as a prime example. He dropped to 6.9 million last night. I never had any intention of selling him from my team, partly because I've already used my free transfer, but also because I think he's a good option going forward. If he does well against Chelsea, which he may or may not do, it's an away game, it's not easy, but if he does, and then he also does really well against Leicester at home in game week 4, all of a sudden people will start buying him and his price can go back up. So I wouldn't make every decision in FPL based on who's going down or up in price, but it is another source of information. So players like Kwanzaa and Nkunku in particular in the first couple of game weeks have been really popular to sell, and we know that going forward it's very unlikely they're going to see regular minutes, so there's more reason to get rid of them before the prices drop, but you're not going to be able to do that every time. Likewise, if there's a player that you know you want, you're going to buy them next week anyway. You've got a free transfer. They're just as good, if not better, than the player you want to remove, and they're going up in price. You might want to do that early. But as we get further on in the season and European matches start up and first-team players are playing both in the Premier League and in the Champions League and, and other European competitions, there's also more room for injuries and stuff like that. So the not the need to, but the feasibility of moving early on a player before we see all those extra games is going to get less and less. So it's okay going early right now. There's less risk tied to that. That's going to change. And also, it's probably worth saying that there won't always be this many price drops and rises. They will continue throughout the season, but the amount will get much fewer. So we don't need to panic about it forever, but it is pretty annoying right now. And ultimately, at some point this season, you're going to suffer a price drop. You're going to not be able to buy a player before they go up in price. And I would just try not to worry about it. And I know I say that as someone that's already sold 2 players who are dropping in price, but to me, they are just now duds as FPL options. You know, I've kept Fernandes, I've kept Eze, they've dropped in price. Like, I've just dealt with that. There's nothing I can do about it. My only hope is they will score points over the next couple of weeks and they will go up in price. And also, just because you're losing money in some places, in other areas, players are going up in price as well. So just quickly take my team for an example. I've lost money on on Eze and Fernandes. Rodgers has gone up in price already. If he does really well against Leicester, given he's only 5.1, he'll go up again. João Pedro, I don't think he's gone up yet. Let me just double check. He hasn't, but he could do soon. Smith Rowe's already gone up in price in my team. So has Robinson. Like, you lose in some areas and you gain in others. It can't be something that consistently plays on your mind. Absolutely, you should check it. If there's a move you want to make and it's tight on money, you might have to go early. But don't let it be the deciding factor for every move you make this season. So with Liverpool signing Chiesa, are all Liverpool attackers outside of Salah and avoid? Now, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question because I avoided Jota in game week 1. He's got attacking returns in both of the first 2 matches. But obviously, Chiesa does add another body that Slot can use either in the 11 or off the bench. I think initially it's much more likely that he's used off the bench. I don't see him going straight into that Liverpool 11. And I also think that Liverpool have moved on Chiesa as an opportunity because the price was so good. Like, it's such a low price for what he can potentially deliver. I don't think it's a case that they were going out of their way to add another winger because ultimately they've already got quite a few players in those attacking positions. So I don't think it's a case that Slot really wanted him and he's going to go straight into the 11. I think we're going to see against Man United, it'll be Luis Diaz, Jota and Salah front 3 again. And if they continue to perform well, you know, and are fit and available, there's no reason that can't continue from game week 4 onwards. I do think still, and I know I've got it wrong so far with Jota, but longer term, there's going to be more of a minutes risk, especially when Champions League games start up. Because if you're looking at it and saying, well, Jota, Salah and Diaz are clearly first choice, they're also going to be wanted in the Champions League games as well, especially those tougher ones, which means they might get more of a rest in the Premier League games. Not necessarily that they don't start, but they get subbed off earlier and earlier. And I just wouldn't be surprised if at some point Darwin Núñez doesn't play instead of Jota. It might not be for a few weeks and Jota could do really well in the meantime, but at some point it could happen. And similarly with Luis Diaz, right? They could play Chiesa or Gakpo left wing instead. The interesting thing that Slot said in his press conference is that they've now got 4 wingers. So that would presumably be Diaz, Gakpo, Chiesa and Salah. And that means that Jota isn't really seen as someone that's going to play on the left for Slot. We know he can do it, but I think his best position is probably centrally. So it sounds like he's only really competing with Darwin Núñez. Obviously, Gakpo can play central as well, but I think his best position is on the left. And right now, Jota's playing so well that you would think he could keep his place in the side. But once Champions League starts, who knows what's going to happen. So I think if you're getting on Liverpool players soon, either you're wildcarding in 3 or 4, then Diaz and Jota, both of them, they look like pretty good value for money and almost are probably worth taking the punt on because of the fixtures they've got. I wouldn't go for both, but maybe one of them if the rest of your team looks like solid picks in terms of minutes. But I just think the longer you leave it, the worse this is going to get. Like, if you're not happy to move now, you're never going to be happy unless there's injuries and stuff. So I don't think Chiesa makes a massive difference initially. Long term, maybe. And if you want to go for Jota or Diaz, I think they're still pretty good options for their price. And I've probably got it wrong on Jota in game week 1. So considering Newcastle have been poor, is Son a captaincy option if you're on a Salah draft with no Haaland, Saka or Palmer? Now, there's nothing wrong with Son. I don't think he's a terrible captain choice this week. And if you want to go for him, you should. But my initial thoughts when I saw this question were, just go for Salah. Like, I don't consider Salah top 3 this week. It probably is Haaland, Saka and Palmer, but you don't own any of them. There's nothing wrong with captaining Salah against Man United. Unless you think that Man United are going to put up a really tough test, you know, and be defensively sound, then maybe you could look elsewhere. But Salah is so good, he's always going to get chances. So I would probably go for Salah over Son, but there's maybe not a lot in it. Like Liverpool, I would say probably the better attacking team out of the two. Salah probably the better FPL option in isolation. Is Man United that much tougher than Newcastle away? I'm not sure if it is. I think we need to see more matches before we can determine that. So I think Salah is fine. Also, you've probably got Isak. I think he's also a really good option because the Spurs defence isn't great, and obviously he's the one at home. He's also on penalties too. So I think if I had a choice between Son and Isak, it'd actually be quite close because obviously Son's the midfielder. We know the extra points, etc. for a clean sheet and goal. But Isak's at home, and I know he hasn't performed well so far, but I keep saying it, that can change quite quickly. So I think if I was in your position, I'd probably go for Salah. I wouldn't mind going for Son, but I'd also really consider Isak as well. So is Saka to Palmer a viable move this week, considering Palmer has the better fixture in game week 3 and is a potential captaincy option in game weeks 4 and 5? So yes, it's viable if you can do it for free. Preferably you want to do this in one move. I'm not sure it's worth 2 free transfers, but either way, for free it's viable. I would not take a hit. But overall, it's not a move that I think I would make this week. You could definitely argue that Crystal Palace at home at this point in time looks better than Brighton at home, but I don't think there's a huge amount in it. And Saka's also just great, right? And if Palmer hadn't got 4 attacking returns last week, would we be considering this quite as much? Probably not, because we'd be thinking, well, Saka's still great, Brighton at home's a good fixture, I'm just going to keep hold of him. And of course, you could look at future game weeks to make the move look even better, but you can still make this transfer in game week 4. It doesn't have to be done in game week 3. You could keep Saka this week, roll your extra transfer, and then decide what to do in game week 4. And by game week 4, the landscape of FPL might have changed. There might have been something big that's happened to your team in game week 3 or over the international break, where actually there's a better use of transfers, and having Saka against Spurs away really isn't the end of the world. I would also question the captaincy angle, to be honest with you, because Palmer's fixtures in 4 and 5 are fine, Bournemouth away and West Ham away, but they don't scream captaincy to me. Like, it's not that he'll be a terrible option, but most people have one of Salah or Haaland, and both of those players have home games in game week 4. So Haaland is against Brentford at home, and Salah's against Forest at home. And I think both of them would be better captaincy options than Cole Palmer. Now, if you don't own Salah, and you've got a Haaland draft instead, well, Haaland does play Arsenal at home in game week 5, so you might want to go elsewhere, and maybe you want Cole Palmer for that week. But that's 2 game weeks away. You don't have to make that decision right now. So do I think that Cole Palmer, game weeks 3 to 5, is probably going to score more points than Saka? Yes. Do I think that's going to happen in a big way this week? Not really. And I think for most people, it's probably better to roll the transfer than to make the move. But it's certainly not a move that I would talk people out of doing. If you want to go for it, you should. Cole Palmer is a great option. I just think Saka is too. So what do you think of Isak to Wattkins this week? Now, this is a move that a lot of people talked about back in pre-season. If it was your plan all along, I don't see a massive issue with just going through with that move. Like, the fixtures that Aston Villa are about to have look really good. And when he's fit and available, Watkins almost always starts. So there's not really a massive problem with making the move if that was your plan. But a bit like Saka to Palmer, I'm not sure I would make it this week. You could always make it in game week 4 instead if you want to. And the reason for that is, as frustrating as Isak has been, Spurs at home is not a bad fixture. He's guaranteed to be on penalties, and he's probably going to play 80 to 90 minutes. Whereas with Watkins, he's not on penalties guaranteed. It could easily be like Tielemans or McGinn instead. Watkins doesn't have a great record. I know Douglas Luiz has gone now, but who's on penalties for Villa is up in the air, and he's probably not going to play 80 to 90 minutes because in the first 2 games, he's been subbed off before the 70th. It was 61 minutes in game week 1 and 64 in game week 2. Now, when I saw those minutes in game week 1, ahead of game week 2, I thought he'd maybe get like 70 in the next game, then build up to 80. But it seems like they're taking it a bit slower with him. And I think he's going to start against Leicester. There's not a problem there, I don't think. But if he only gets 70 minutes, is that better than Isak at home to Spurs with guaranteed penalties for 80 to 90? I'm not sure it is. And again, it's not that it's a bad move. Like, Saka to Palmer is absolutely fine, but things could change by game week 4, and you've still got the opportunity to make that move. You can just roll your transfer instead. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable and viable move if you want to do it, but I'm not sure I would make it this week. So a few people asked a question similar to this. If you wildcard this week with 2 free transfers, will you have 3 transfers in game week 4, or will it still be 2 transfers? So my understanding is the week after you wildcard, you'll have the same number of transfers as you had before you activated the chip. So for me, going into game week 3, I had 1 free transfer. If I'd wildcarded this week, I'd still have 1 in game week 4. And if you've got 2 free transfers and you wildcard game week 3, you'll have 2 free transfers in game week 4. So you can roll your free transfers through the wildcard now, which you weren't able to do previously, but you don't also gain another transfer the week you activate it, which I think is fair. I think it'd be a bit too overpowered if you could do that as well. So that's my understanding. I know people are wildcarding this week with 2 free transfers, so we'll find out for sure next week, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So is it smart to hold Nkunku through another price drop to reassess next game week? I can bench him this week, and transferring him out now is only causing me a benching headache. So he's already gone down 0.1. It looks like he's quite close to go down another 0.1, either tonight, maybe tomorrow night on Saturday instead. It's a really tough situation to be in. I think if we were talking about this on Sunday and we knew he was going to drop 0.2 in a week, I think everyone probably should have just got rid of him. It's not worth losing that much value. But because you've already lost 0.1 and you can't do anything about that now, part of me thinks you just take the next one as well. Like, unless there's a player you can bring in that is an upgrade this week and in the future and you're completely sure about it, it might just be worth getting that extra information in game week 3 and deciding what to do from game week 4 onwards. Like, I bought in Smith Rowe and I'm still not completely sure it was a great move, but he is probably better than João Pedro this week, and he could be quite useful to me in game weeks 4 and 5. And obviously I did that before I lost the first 0.1. But if you're still looking at it and you're not really sure who you want to bring in, and even if you do, you've then got to bench someone who's good, I'd probably just eat another price drop. It's super frustrating. You don't want to continually lose 0.2 million on players throughout the season, especially ones that aren't probably going to play. But I'd be tempted in your case, and I'm sure a lot of people are in this situation as well, just to hold him and hope for the best and that it doesn't affect you too much in the future. So how many hits would you take to not use your wild card? And I think for me, the absolute maximum would probably be just a 4-point hit. Like, if you're starting to think about -8s, -12s, or even more, there's almost no reason not to activate the chip. And some people might say, well, if I wildcard now, I'll definitely need hits in the future. But you also just might not. Your wildcard might go really well. You start building up free transfers, and actually any hits for your team are a long way away. So I think -8s or above, you've got to wildcard. And to be honest, when I think about my own team, I'm not even sure I would take a 4-point hit before wildcarding. If you're set up in a way where you think 13 out of 15 of your squad are great, they're going to be brilliant for the next 4 to 5 weeks, you literally only need to make 2 moves, then maybe you take the hit instead of using your chip. But for a lot of people, when you're already looking at -4, there's probably other upgrades you can make as well. And so I'd probably just use the wild card instead. But absolute maximum, 4-point hit. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on podcast, rate 5 stars. All of it really helps the channel to continue to grow. And if you haven't checked out Sleeper, make sure you do. It's a completely free fantasy football app, which you can download using the link in the description below or scanning the QR code on screen. You can try out the free games they've got. You can check out the news and live updates as well. There's really no reason not to give it a go. So links in the description below. Set your draft up over the international break and let me know how you get on. Otherwise, I will catch you tomorrow for the deadline stream, probably starting at 9 AM UK time over on YouTube. So I'll see you then.